Good morning. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of people seated and waiting. So let's go ahead and get started. And I know we're just a couple minutes early. We've got a few announcements to make, and then we will get on with our program. So good morning, and thanks for being here today. We appreciate your flexibility from not coming on the snowy day a month ago, and we're so glad to have you here today. We do have two parts to our meeting. Our first is going to be our program with Dr. Jeanne Klein. She is a suffragist historian. And then followed by part two, and you may have noticed the tables. I know a lot of you were looking at those tables. That is another part of our meeting that would have been part of January's meeting, but since we didn't have it, it's today. And that was an opportunity to learn about the different league committees and activities and opportunities for you to sign up and be a part of the league in a specific way. You should also have received, when you walked in, there was a list of possible program ideas for next year. Did you all see that? Did you get it when you, okay, perfect. If you did not, they're in a little box right at the end of the table, so be sure and get that, because that's going to be your opportunity to help us determine which programs we have next year. We ask you to rank order those, and I'm sure you realize that there are lots more ideas than we have programs. We only do programs 9 times a year, so there's lots more than 9 ideas. And if there's something else that you would like included, be sure and put that on the list, and we will take a look at those. I do want you to realize, too, that as the board, we do reserve the right to add a program that may not be on the list if there's a current issue that needs to be addressed quickly. So just know that we welcome your opportunity, we welcome your input, but we also know that we may need to add some other things too. Okay, this is the monthly plug. Just a reminder, the League is a grassroots nonprofit organization grounded in nonpartisan policy, meaning we neither support or oppose any candidate or political party at any level of government. This protects our 501c3 status. Let us be leaders in civility in the political arena. Our mission is to defend democracy and to empower voters. We continue our efforts to engage and educate voters on upcoming elections and public policy through programs like today's. While we aren't partisan, we are political. Our league has been actively involved in federal, state, and local government public policy for more than 71 years, as evidenced by our longstanding position statements. Please be involved. It is my honor today to introduce to you Dr. Jeanne Klein. As the historian for the Kansas Suffragist Memorial Committee, Jeanne will share her insights and thoughts about the mural, Rebel Women, that was dedicated in the Kansas State Capitol building this past Wednesday. I hope you got the email. We were going to have the actual artist. Unfortunately, Phyllis Pease's father passed away this week, and Jeanne has graciously come to share her expertise with us today. We are so excited. She's a retired professor from the University of Kansas, and she has been researching Kansas suffrage since 2019. After her presentation, we'll take questions from you. Please write them on the card on your chair. If you have it, hold it up, and we'll collect those as the presentation is progressing. Thank you so much, Jeanne. Welcome to the League.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yep. Just know that Phyllis is here. Okay? What an incredible woman. She gave a really incredible, impeccable speech at the dedication, and we're forever grateful. Okay, so I'm going to zip through this. You'll see that there's the big point I want to make here is that the suffrage movement was a movement of hundreds of women and men across the entire state, okay? And it was not just Northeast Kansas where the population was, all right? It was across the entire state. And this is a wonderful website I'd urge you to go to read the names of women who were from Olathe, okay? And I'm not sure what other little towns there would have been in Johnson County at the time. I know Johnson County is pretty old. It goes back to 1855 is my understanding, okay? But I'm just not sure when the settlements were around and which towns the women would have been signing up for. And as you know, there were plenty of Kansas City, Kansas women and men who were also suffragists. And I want to be very clear about that. It's gists and not jets, okay? I'll just say that now. The gists, the reason we're called suffragists is because the United States women used that name. And the reason we use that name is we wanted to be completely distinct from the British suffragettes who used militant tactics like blowing up post office boxes and destroying buildings and protesting and beating up on officers and you name all sorts of things. And the U.S. movement did not want to have anything to do with the Jets, Benny or otherwise, okay? So that's why we are known as the suffragists. That's the U.S. term. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the incredible mural that was dedicated on Wednesday, and there's Phyllis up in the sky as the angel she is, overlooking the entire mural. So let's move to the next slide. So there were basically 5 Kansas campaigns, okay? The first was Clarina Nichols went to the Wyandotte Convention in 1859, fought like heck with her knitting needles clicking, and and when we became a state, women were then granted the right to vote in school elections and to run for school board offices, all right? And other states had done that before, but it happened in Kansas in 61 when we became a state. And then in 1867, we were the first state in the nation to propose that the words white and male be removed from the Constitution, all right? And when that happened, all the national suffragists were so impressed with us that they descended upon the state, okay, because we were the first to suggest that for women, in addition to black men as well, and campaigned across the entire state, okay? Unfortunately, it lost. That amendment, the 2 amendments were defeated, but we got a lot of press. And of course, in 1870 is when the 15th Amendment granted black men the right to vote. So that was good news. 1887, again, Kansas became the first state in the nation to grant women the right to vote in city elections. You could vote for your mayor, you could vote for your city council folks, et cetera. Okay, so that was pretty amazing. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. We tried again for full suffrage in 1894. That was defeated, didn't work. But lo and behold, 1912 is when we got equal suffrage. You could vote for presidents and senators and representatives, et cetera. Okay, that's when we got full suffrage. Okay, and of course the 19th Amendment in 1920. Okay, so Clarina Nichols is our main mover and shaker, the main leader, and that's why Phyllis has her at the forefront, in the very, very front of the V for victory, okay, in her row of 13 rebel women. And the reason for that is she sparked the whole movement. In 1854, she gave the first women's right lecture in Lawrence, Kansas. Okay, her reputation preceded her, and everyone couldn't wait to hear her speak. And then she moved to Quindaro, where she became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and that's why Phyllis has painted her with an American woman next to her. Okay, helping to shelter her at her Underground Railroad station in Quindaro. And then she also, again, collected 600 signatures from on horseback all around northeast Kansas, delivered them to the Wyandotte Convention, and then in 1861, again, we won the right to vote in school board elections, and also got some child custody rights as a result of her work, and also some property rights. She wrote, okay, so there's a history of women's suffrage anthology, which is the Bible, the primary source of all the suffrage history, that was edited by Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Matilda Gage, etc. And Clarina is the one, and there's chapters for every single state, and Clarina wrote the chapter for Kansas, okay, in that book, so you can read all the stuff there. And she definitely needs, I'm going to talk about Pomeroy markers more at the League state meeting on April 26th, on how you can go about getting an extra special marker for your founding suffragists in the different counties. And I'm not sure about how it would work with Johnson County, because I know you were founded in the 20th century at some point. So, well, anyway, that's to be talked about. But Clarina needs a Pomeroy at Quindaro at the ruins, along with all the other stuff. Okay, so here's the campaign, and here's all the folks. Again, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone and her husband, Henry Blackwell, and Reverend Olympia Brown were the major suffragists who came to Kansas, campaigned across the entire state, okay, and put us on the map. And again, it was defeated. I do have to mention Helen Aiken Sterrett because she's a Lawrence woman and she became really good friends with Susan B. Anthony. Susan stayed at her house. Helen attended the first National Women's Suffrage Convention in 1869. She lectured and published all sorts of women's suffrage articles in the Lawrence Tribune. Moved to Chicago in 1880 where she continued fighting for women's rights, and she has some sections in volume 2 of the history of women's suffrage where she talks about the events that happened. Anna C. Waite, major important woman here, okay, memorize. This woman organized the suffragists in Lincoln, Kansas. Do you know where Lincoln, Kansas is? North Central, okay? Fabulous town. I made a trip out there. I can't speak highly enough of it, okay? So if you're doing a road trip, go to Lincoln. Anyway, she and her husband owned and edited the newspaper called the Lincoln Beacon, and that's how they spread suffrage news across the entire state for 20 years. Right, like we do with social media. It was the power of the press back then. She co-founded the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association, KESA, in 1884, all right? And that's why I made a trip out to Lincoln and spoke to them, and they have a wonderful little exhibit of Anna Waite. And so, of course, she was the first KESA president and also wrote the chapter on Kansas in Volume 3, because she knew that whole story and was very active. So here are all the towns where the meetings were held, and I just want you to look at that list, all right, and realize how many small towns hosted the annual KESA meetings, all right, across the whole state. I mean, you have Enterprise, Winfield, Eureka. There's KCK. I found out when that one is. And there's Olathe. I'll bring up that in a minute, et cetera. So, I mean, it was truly a statewide movement. It wasn't just Northeast Kansas. And here's a list of the presidents, okay? So again, starting with Anna C. Waite, who is in the mural, and Laura Johns and so forth. So I'll be talking about more of those women a little bit as we move on. And this is the 1887 campaign, what the House looked like at the time. Next slide. And Anna O. Anthony, so she was the wife of Daniel Reed Anthony, who was Susan B. Anthony's younger brother. How handy is that? And they lived in Leavenworth, and so, of course, they hosted Susan B. Anthony and all the national suffragists and stuff when they came to Kansas into Leavenworth. And Daniel helped fund a lot of Susan's campaign needs, okay, for traveling and so forth. It was really great. And there's an example of the Pomeroy marker. So Mary Ann Brown, God bless her, who is the curator at the Leavenworth County Historical Society, she got the first Pomeroy marker, first for Kansas, planted along the Missouri River in honor of Anna and Daniel Anthony, which is just down the same street from where their house is, all right? And it was dedicated in October 2023. So that's why I'm really pushing or encouraging more Kansas chapters, okay, to get Pomeroy markers, or get a marker for at least, you know, one woman or a couple or something who would be extra special, all right, for and meaningful for Johnson County, all right, or Olathe, what have you. So that depends on some history. Okay, I wanted to mention Martia Berry. Again, she was the long-term treasurer of KESA, attended the conference, et cetera. And when I spoke I contacted Cawker City, and they have a hand-signed copy of History of Women's Suffrage signed by Susan B. Anthony in Cawker City. So, I mean, you know, I think those are really incredible treasures that county historical societies sometimes have. Okay, so if you're ever at Cawker City, ask to see the signature. Okay, so again, as I said, February 15, 1887, which happened to be Susan B. Anthony's birthday, that was the date that Kansas became the first state to get to vote in city elections. And I want to mention Sarah Brown, too, another Lawrence woman, okay, who was pretty special. She was active in lots of campaigns in Lawrence and was the first woman nominated for a state office in Kansas, and that office was State Superintendent of Public Construction. Now, okay, so she lost, but she had the backing of Susan B. and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all right, and lost by just a few votes. But the other thing that she's known for is she co-authored a pamphlet called "What Women Voters Can Do," that basically was how to register for the city elections, all right, and I just think that's pretty important, all right, and she was one of the co-authors of that, and they spread that, 50,000 copies across the state so women would know what to do. Okay, and I want to mention here too, Carrie Langston Hughes and Mary Jane Dillard. So Phyllis has included a little vignette with Langston Hughes seated at the table. Carrie Langston was the daughter of Charles Langston and Mary Langston, who were major civil rights leaders, okay, in this state, and gave birth to Langston Hughes. And then Mamie was a good friend of hers, and these two women also were fighting for suffrage and so forth through the Women's Christian Temperance Union as well, okay, and they had a big effect on Langston, and look what happened to him. Okay. Laura M. Johns is, again, another major important woman. Phyllis has her with a KISA banner across her body, and that's because she was a 6-term president of KISA, all right? Very, very active. And Celina is working on getting a marker for her, a Pomeroy marker, and a grave marker, because I don't think she has one. Can you imagine? Why not? And so you can see, again, everything she did. So she was lobbying the Kansas Republicans in the legislature, and again was very active in organizing campaigns and whatnot across the country, okay, for the National Women's Suffrage Association. And the campaign, here's the 1894 campaign. Colorado had won full suffrage in 1893, so Kansas thought, okay, it's our turn, right? And lo and behold, we couldn't move the male voters to agree with us. But there was a little newsletter, 4-page newsletter that came out of Lawrence called The Suffrage Advocate. Again, they circulated 5,000 copies across the state, spreading the news and so forth, trying to get people psyched up for this campaign. And unfortunately, over half of Kansas men defeated this amendment by, 34,000 votes, and 25% did not vote at all. And that's what gets under my goat a lot, when people don't vote at all and take no responsibility whatsoever for their decisions. And we all know what that means. Okay, Annie Diggs. So while Laura Johns was lobbying the Republicans in the legislature, Annie Diggs was working on the populists, all right? Because if you recall, in the 1890s, there was a huge populist movement that arose in Kansas. And so Annie Diggs actually started in Lawrence, Kansas, okay, married to a postal worker, and attended and began working on campaigns in actually 1880. And attended national conventions and spoke at them, lobbied the legislators and said, I am the fierce one, I scare people. This is coming from a 5-foot tall, very little petite woman, all right, who had a large voice and carried a big stick. So there she is. And the other cool thing is she became a state librarian and helped design the state library. So when you go to the Capitol to see the mural, make sure you go to the state library, okay? And right next to the state library is this amazing mural of Brown versus Board of Education. And when you go inside the library, be sure you touch Annie Diggs's desk. It's still with me, okay? I mean, talk about a powerful woman. And she died and buried in Detroit, which happens to be my hometown, so I'm glad we found her there. Okay, and she wrote, again, the Kansas chapter in Volume 4, okay? So very major, important woman. I want to mention Laura Gregg because I found out that she led the annual meeting as KISA president, and that annual meeting was held here in Olathe, here next door, Olathe, in December of 1900. Okay, so that's some of the earliest information I can find about the machinations of what's going on with your league, okay, members. And again, it would be great to find out the people who attended that meeting from Olathe, okay, and get some names and stuff. It'd be kind of neat. But this is a KISA meeting going on, and Laura was the president at the time, okay? And Lila D. Monroe, another incredible woman, first woman to practice law before the Kansas Supreme Court. She's a KISA president. She published the Kansas Woman's Journal out of the State House. And if you know the book, I have the cover there a little bit, Pioneer Women. She interviewed over 800 pioneer women, and her granddaughter, great-granddaughter, finished the book for her, had it published, and I have to tell you, Joanna Stratton Roz contacted us and donated towards the mural, and she was forever grateful that Lila was included in the mural. And unfortunately, of course, could not be at the dedication, but she lives in Washington State. So there's a few descendants that are still with us, which is really cool. Okay, Elodie Little, born in Tennessee, moved to Topeka, got her education mostly in Topeka, and became the first American woman admitted to the Kansas bar, okay? And she got her law degree in Tennessee. I think she could have gotten it at KU, but I don't know the details, because KU did have at least two African-American men who got their law degrees from KU at the law school in 1887 and 89, if my memory serves, okay? So I'm not sure what went on there. But anyway, a neat lady. So she's also included in Phyllis's mural. So there was another newspaper, and again, I want to point out here, this was the official KISA newspaper, and again, published out of Eureka and Leroy. Okay, and these women, I think, as I recall, were also past presidents of KISA. So lots of stuff going on in these little small towns. It's really important that we owe them a lot, okay? And so between 1900 and 1909, KISA asked for full suffrage 5 more times, and the bills all died, mostly in the Senate, as like things happen today. Okay, I just want to mention Sadie Grisham, again, another president, campaigned across Chase County and was a founding member of the Kansas Women's Lawyers Association in 1919. So there's a lot of lawyers and journalists and teachers in the 13 list, the whole 13 women that are painted, that Phyllis painted. So it's another person. Okay, so this is my bandwagon. Okay, Lizzie S. Sheldon is incredible. So she graduated from KU Law in 1900, was a staunch Democrat, okay? And she got tired of waiting for KISA to make things happen, okay? So she just said the heck with it, and she just went straight to the source. And so what she did is she handed Senator George Hodges a resolution for a constitutional amendment that reads, "The rights of citizens of the state of Kansas to vote and hold offices shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex." Where have you heard that language before? The Equal Rights Amendment, right? It was pretty standard language. So she hands this resolution to Senator Hodges, who is the Democrat, and it gets passed through the legislature, and then Governor Stubbs signs the resolution on February 15, Susan B. Anthony's birthday, and then it's put before the voters in November 1912 and again passed, and that's how Kansas women got the right to vote in all elections, right, in presidential and so forth. So here's the crazy thing. So 2 years later, Governor Hodges happens to become the Democratic governor of Kansas, and he says, "I got women the right to vote." And Lizzie Sheldon fired back in the newspapers and said, "You did not, I wrote it." Okay, quit taking credit for what you have no business taking credit for, all right? And the only reason, that he did it is because she could not walk on the legislative floor. She was relegated to the balcony like most folks, okay? Anyway, so I just think it's a great story. This woman knew how to use the power of the press, and she was amazing. Next slide. I want to mention also Lucy B. Johnson, a major woman who was president of KISA during the campaign for 1911 and 12, and wrote the Kansas chapter for Volume 6, okay? And we've got the 1912 campaign, and so The next slide. So Lucy explained, here's why. We were trying to understand, like, why did we lose the 1894 campaign, but we won the 1912? And Lucy explained it this way. She felt that, again, Prohibition had been a law in the state for 32 years, and the men and their liquor didn't have their liquor centers all that time, okay? And the Associated Press also called out their lies. So that is helpful when you have the press on your side. There was also a men's equal suffrage league that included her husband, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, which doesn't hurt, and they would do speeches without charging any money. And then so here's the key. Workers travel to where the crowds are. Don't expect people to come to you. You have to go where the people are. I think this is a major lesson we all need to think about, okay? Don't expect them to come to you. You have to go to where they are. So what the workers did is they went to Chautauquas, they went to all the factories where women are working, at the Armour meat plant and you know, et cetera, and county fairs. They traveled to all the conventions, all the conventions for teachers, for ministers, farmers, temperance unions, women's organizations, whatever. They went to every single one of those conventions and spoke, okay? And that's part of the movement that they've got going. And of course, the progressive movement itself converted a lot of party politicians who begged for forgiveness for their previous stance. So, you know, they'll figure it out later. And here's an auto parade photo of Governor Stubbs and Stella, who was very influential and more Topeka folks. And here's the parade. This is a classic photo you've seen everywhere, and Phyllis has included it in the mural. And I just want everybody to know that is a Douglas County fair in September of 1912, okay, that was decorated for the fair. And last but not least, or not last, Minnie Grinstead was the first woman elected to the Kansas House of Representatives in 1918, and fittingly, she is the one who presented the joint resolution to ratify the 19th Amendment in the Kansas House in 19. Okay, so she's included in the mural as well, and I think that's really, really cool. And she needs a Pomeroy marker way out in Liberal or Leonard, I guess, either one. And then finally, Jane Brooks, and you all know about Jane Brooks. She was the woman who is our founder of the very first League of Women Voters state chapter, the Kansas chapter, in 1919, as well as the Sedgwick County / Wichita chapter in 1919, okay? And this all happened before the 1920 amendment. So cheers to Jane Brooks, okay? So she's included in the mural as well. Okay, so here's the thing. So remember I told you about Lizzie, okay, who had the constitutional amendment that got passed in 1912 that said all citizens shall have the right to vote and hold offices regardless of sex. So if you will recall, okay, so I have to say, I confess, I had Lizzie in my heart on the day of the dedication, and I was in my costume, and so I walked across the street to the judicial building, and I handed a letter that I didn't bring with me to the Supreme Court justices. If you will recall, in 2024, the Supreme Court decided that the gerrymandered map is okay because the Kansas Constitution says nothing about voting rights. So my question to the Supreme Court justices, which I hope they will answer, or their clerks, what happened to the 1912 amendment that gave at least half the population the right to vote? How and when and why was it excised from the Kansas Constitution after 1912? And why can't we get it back, and why can't we change the gerrymandered map that puts Lawrence's little blip into the West big first? Okay, so that's my soapbox. So anyhow, there you go. I'm ready for questions if you have any questions. Can you tell I'm just a little passionate, that I have just a few of those, the suffragist spirit within me? I just feel so proud of all of these women and many, many more who aren't even mentioned. So. Okay, why are suffragists separated by race, the white on the left, the black on the right? That was not purposeful. That might be a question for Phyllis, and let me I can't answer for her. I want to be very clear about that. But let me say that we worked really hard trying to find Mexican suffragists, all right? And the reason we could not do that is because, the reason that it doesn't, I mean, we looked all over the whole state. And the reason we couldn't find anyone is because, as you may know, most Mexicans did not come to Kansas until around 1900, 1910s. And many of them left their families back in Mexico until they could earn enough money to, again, bring their families up. And again, it's exact same story as the same story that happened with African Americans. It's not until the second generation that you get the activists, all right? So it would take another generation of Mexicans and a third generation of Phyllis, okay, to become activists and to vote, to have the right to vote. So that's the same story with Carrie Langston, okay? She's, again, the daughter of Charles and Mary Langston, and it's not until 1890 that she's an adult. She's in her 20s, and now she's savvy, and she knows what's going on, and she's starting to speak up and fight for her rights and encourage other people to do the same thing. So, again, it's a generational situation. So I don't know if, again, I can't answer for Phyllis, but I think she might have tried to do like the early part of the movement on the left side, and then on the right side to do, she was told that she could not go past 1920 with the 19th Amendment, okay? So she snuck in some men in 20th century suits and different colors, the whole rainbow of folks, okay? So when you look at the mural, study it really closely, okay? And look at the details of that big crowd in the back, because that's the movement. And what are good books to read about these amazing women? Well, my dear friend Mary Ann Brown, who is the curator at the Leavenworth County Museum, has a fabulous book about all the women of Leavenworth, all the suffragists in Leavenworth. And I think you can, I can't remember where you can buy that book. It might be, you have to go to some self-publishing company, okay? But it's a fabulous book, and she's going to have another big event at the Leavenworth Museum on April 11, all right? And they'll be celebrating the Leavenworth suffragists. So again, as far as I'm concerned, you really do need to read the history of women's suffrage, the Kansas chapters, and they're all online. And you can just sit there in the comfort of your home and just read the chapters online, okay? The Kansas chapters. It's a little, it takes a little while to flip through and find them, but they're all there. And it really is interesting reading, I think. Whatever.
Okay, here's some other questions. In 2025, who are the female heroes in Kansas leading the charge to advance women's rights?
I don't know. I mean, if you read the newspapers, I'd put Laura Governor Kelly right up there. And I think we have a whole bunch of governors, who from the past, who also carried that mantle. And heck, anybody who's in the state legislature right now, I think, any woman in the state legislature, I think, deserves all the support they can get, because it's a divisive time, and it's hard to pass some things. So praise them when you can.
And these are, how did the women in the past spread those papers, flyers? Was it by mail, hand-delivered, media? How did the news get out?
Horseback. And the post office, okay? So there's newspapers, excuse me. And again, my understanding is that like a long-distance newspaper like the Lincoln Beacon could be delivered by mail, all right? And it's not just the Pony Express, but it's also the railroad, all right, is delivering the mail and so forth, okay? And there's post office places in every single town and along every railroad line. So, yeah, it was all power of the press. And again, it was, Lizzie Sheldon was strictly using newspapers, okay, to spread the word. And if she were alive today, it would all be social media,
Thank you. And another question, how did they fund their work and the movement back in the past?
They had benefits, okay? So they would, I'm trying to think of some examples. I mean, they did gobs of speeches at various, buildings and so forth, okay, meeting places in downtown areas. And no one, they didn't charge for that, all right? I mean, you went, it was to hear the speech and to, care about it and to vote, to try and convince the men to vote. But they also did some, different kinds of festivals and whatnot, again, trying to raise money that would pay for for their travel. I'm remembering Reverend Olympia Brown. If you go to look at her biography on the website, it says that she traveled by horseback across the state of Kansas and gave 300 speeches. And again, Daniel Anthony was helping to fund his sister's work as much as possible too, okay?
And this may not be a question but are these suffrage female heroes that you spoke about, are they being taught in Kansas schools?
I don't know, is anybody teaching this? It would be nice, okay? We have the Kansas Historical Society has created a little brochure, and we've been trying to spread, email it to people. I can't remember if I emailed it to you or not. Anyway, I'll remind me, I'll give you the, and basically it just does a little thumbnail sketch of the 13 women. So yeah, it's up to teachers to do this. Now, we are talking about, our committee is talking about, we would love to do lesson plans for middle school and high school teachers and up, okay? And I may be involved in that, again, I used to teach K-12 and so forth. And there's a whole bunch of folks. But we don't know how that's going to happen, and we're also not sure if we have to have the curriculum approved by the Kansas Department of History, Social Studies, et cetera, which I'm sure they're going to want. But I would use all those standards anyway, right? To craft whatever ideas. So if you have ideas, if you want to work on that, please let us know. That'd be great.
Thank you. This is a question regarding the mural. Could you tell us about adding the wedding ring on her mother's hand?
Phyllis kept dropping these little clues that we didn't even know about until the day of. So all I know is what she told us, okay, that she had this empty space in the bottom right corner, and we just thought it was always going to be empty. And this is what I mean by she's a rebel woman. I mean, she's using, right, the inspiration of these women to do her own rebel work. So she painted her mother in the bottom right corner in a calico farm dress, holding, I think it's called the Woman Citizen, and I'm not sure which newsletter or that is exactly, if she was trying to tie in her mother's generation with the 1920s, 1910s, reading material. And she talked about the fact that at the last minute she added her mom's wedding ring onto her finger. And she was wearing her mother's pearls at the dedication. And her 100-year-old father was definitely in spirit together with her mom at the dedication. So it was an incredibly poignant dedication and speeches and whatnot. I urge you to listen to Phyllis's speech. There's lots of people who have done little videos on their cell phones, as well as Governor Kelly's speeches as well, so that'd be cool.
Okay, I'll get to this next question, but we were talking before the meeting. Could you tell us what Governor Kelly did that was kind of special on the back of the mural?
She signed her name. And I don't know whose idea that was. It could have been probably Phyllis's idea, okay, probably. But when they installed the mural on Friday, brought it out of Phyllis's home in Manhattan. I don't know how big her doors are, but because this is a 9 or 8 foot by 19 foot mural, okay, and she painted it all in the studio of her home. And now she has her space back at home. And of course, it was a nerve-wracking kind of experience to move it from Manhattan into a big truck, hoping for good weather, hoping not for no wind, moved it into the Capitol, and they made, braces, brackets or something that they nailed into the wall, so the mural hangs on those bracks. I don't know what they're called. I'm ignorant. Anyway, the other thing that's missing is there will also be a black walnut frame that wasn't ready yet, all right? And there's going to be, I think it's only going to go across the top and part of the sides coming down, carved, she's having it carved by some carpenters with native black walnut tree material. And in the top left corner, it will say 1859, because technically that's when Clarina Nichols, started arguing to the Wyandotte Convention, the Constitutional Convention. And then the middle, as I recall, is 1912, when we all got the right to vote, and 1920 will be on the left side for the 19th Amendment. And, sunflowers and
All the good Kansas stuff. And one last question. Do you think writing letters to the editor is an effective way to spread the word about whatever we need to talk about politically?
I think so, and I'm thinking of translating my little letter to the Supreme Court justices for our local newspaper, and I made as an individual citizen, in no way affiliated with League of Women Voters. I read my letter at the Kansas League Day on Wednesday morning, purely as an individual citizen, because I feel really strongly about this. And so I'm thinking of putting it into the Lawrence, and you're all welcome to pick it up and sign your name and do whatever you want with it. But, again, individuals. We are individuals. We're not representing the league in any way, shape, or form. Because I really want that question answered. I want to know.
Well, thank you. Oh, my goodness. You cannot believe how much we appreciate all the information you have shared with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time and helping us learn about the mural and the people on them and all those rebel women. And now we also know what to look for, some of those details, when you are at the Kansas Capitol looking at the mural. And where is it located in the building?
It's on the first floor, off the rotunda, and people talk about the cage elevator. Apparently, everybody knows what the cage elevator is. But it's right off the rotunda. And the Kansas Historical Society thinks we had 400 to 500 people at the dedication in the rotunda, because they gave us a few chairs and it was standing room only around the edges, and then everybody crowded over to this little area between the wall and the cage elevator, and it was just jammed, and everybody's getting photographs and so forth. It was a very special day. So do see the mural up close and spend some time with it, so you can really study the details and to point out the ideas. And I would, you could write to Phyllis and ask her that question about why you're perceiving a racial dividing line in the background of the suffragists, because I didn't particularly notice that, and I'm not quite sure. So.
Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
You are wonderful. Thank you.